thank you very much first to Eileen and to Falco, if I'm saying right, FAWCO, for the invitation to speak today on the panel. My name is Ivana Bacik. As Susan said, I'm a lawyer, an academic lawyer and a practicing lawyer as well, and also I've been a legislator in the Senate here since 2007 and in the government side since 2011, just since last year. Now we've been given 5 or 6 minutes each to speak on this very important topic of stopping violence against women and children, stopping gender-based violence. And it's a rather daunting task following the very experienced and very powerful advocates for change in this area that you've already heard. And I just wanted to pay tribute actually to the work that has been done by the women you've heard, by the organisations that some of them represent, the Rape Crisis Centre, Women's Aid and Muhammad. They've done a great deal in changing law and policy over the years. Ellen told you a joke about the Late Late Show here. Well, there's a joke about Irish mothers. How many Irish mothers does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is, no, it's okay, thanks, I'll just sit here on my own in the dark. The joke being that, you know, the passivity and the sort of the self-sacrifice of the Irish mammy or the Irish mother. Well, in fact, the work that women have done in the fields of rape law, domestic violence and prostitution and other forms of gender-based violence, that work really challenges that notion of Irish women as passive, because there's been a great deal of activism and feminism over the last few decades in particular. Now, I just wanted to try and pull together some of the common themes that have emerged and try and share a few thoughts with you about how we can best tackle, in particular, rape law, domestic violence and prostitution through our laws and our policies. A few themes that emerge through all forms of gender-based violence, and this would have resonance with all of you from different countries, are the myths about gender-based violence, the myth that it is the victim's fault, the myth that this sort of violence is confined to poor women, women of working class origins, and the myth that particularly sexual violence is only perpetrated by strangers. These were myths that really undermined attempts to support survivors or victims over the years. But, you know, in the last few decades, we have seen across different countries internationally research, like research Paul has done, that has tackled these myths and that has established for us as policymakers that it is not the fault of the victim, that gender-based violence is the fault of the perpetrator, that it is something that crosses class boundaries and race and ethnic boundaries and indeed national boundaries, and that it occurs much more predominantly in intimate relationships than by strangers. And this research has informed our law and our policy. But our laws and policies have really been dragged kicking and screaming, if I can use that expression again. They have been dragged forward by feminist activists over the years. So just to deal with those 3 areas, what we've done in Ireland and what is still to be done, and I hope you'll find themes that are relevant to you in other countries too. First, on rape law, there's been a long campaign in Ireland to try and make prosecution of rape offences easier, to try and make the experience of taking part in a trial easier for the victim and the survivor. We have decriminalised marital rape, we've criminalised marital rape, I should say. For a long time, a husband was entitled in Irish law until 1991 to carry out rape with his wife until 1990. In fact, it was until 1991 in England. An exemption for a husband. So that's been done. There are tougher sentences, there are better practices in the courts, particularly by the Gardaí and by medical doctors. What we still have to do in Ireland is comprehensive reform of the law and better treatment and prevention strategies. We have to tackle the continued use of the victim's prior sexual history, which can be used by the accused person, the alleged rapist, as a part of his defence. And we need to also look at our law on consent, because currently the law in Ireland is that a man who says that he believed a woman was consenting to sex has a defence, even where she says she wasn't consenting and where any reasonable person might have recognised she wasn't consenting. So the consent law is a very particular issue in rape trials in Ireland. Turning to look at domestic violence, and again we see there's been a huge amount of change in law over the last few years. Just last year, for example, we extended protection against domestic violence to women who are not necessarily living with the abuser, but who have a child in common with them. This was a really important issue in practice. We now have laws on barring orders and safety orders, so women who are abused can take out orders barring the perpetrator from the home. And we have a better network of shelters and refuges now. However, what we still have to do, again, is reform the law more comprehensively. And we now have a junior minister, Kathleen Lynch, a woman who's worked in this area for a long time, and she wants to try and, I must say I agree with her, she wants to try and refocus the way we're tackling domestic violence. But for a long time we've been trying to put more resources into shelters and support for the victims, the women and their children, which is absolutely critical, and Women's Aid is doing hugely important work. But it hasn't worked in stopping the violence. And we need to look at how we are tackling the perpetrator, challenging the perpetrator, focusing on prevention strategies, perhaps introducing a new offence of domestic violence, being more focused in our criminal laws, and ensuring better prevention strategies. And I think this is an important new focus that we are going to try to bring on this issue as policymakers. Finally, on prostitution. You've heard from Ivana the huge extent of this in Ireland. The sex industry in Ireland is worth about €250 million a year. It's estimated that there are about 1,000 women available to purchase of sex in any one day. Many of them now are on the internet, and that's perhaps replaced street prostitution as a real issue. How has our law changed to tackle this? Again, as a result of activism, we've seen gender-neutral law on prostitution since 1993, changes in policing, laws criminalising trafficking since 2008. But we've seen happily the abolition of the awful term common prostitute that used to dominate the criminal law. However, we still need to do a great deal of work in this area. There is still a focus on the public display of sex as a criminal offence. So in fact, it is not a criminal offence to sell or buy sex in itself. It is loitering or soliciting in a public place for the purpose of selling sex that is the basic, or buying sex that is the basic offence. And there's a new group established in Ireland, Turn Off the Red Light campaign, about 40 different NGOs, including my own party, the Labour Party, that have signed up to that, that seek to try and change the law. Again, it's a new focus on tackling the perpetrator, on adopting the Swedish legislation that many of you will be aware of, which criminalises those who buy sex, the clients, rather than criminalising usually women who sell sex, the prostitutes. And the Swedish model, which has been in place now for over 10 years, to finish on this, has been adopted also in Norway. It has been hugely successful. It has halved street prostitution in Sweden, and the changes have been made in Britain, although they haven't gone as far as Sweden. And we are looking here at incorporating similar changes to our law. But again, I think the legal change, as with all of these areas, is only part of the issue. We need also to look at prevention strategies and education campaigns and how we can tackle the perpetrators of gender-based violence. And I think that has to be our new focus, or our renewed focus when we speak as women and activists across the world, wherever we are, in Ireland or elsewhere, when we seek to tackle gender-based violence in all its many forms. Because the ultimate effect of it is to disempower and disadvantage women as a gender, and all of us, I think, are united in our desire to see that change. Thank you very much.